Hi, in this sound design tutorial I want to break down the sound design of a scene from the horror movie Jack in the Box Rises that I did a full sound design of last year. The movie is out on cinemas now and will be later on Prime too, so if you haven't seen it yet, I highly suggest you do that. It's a really cool movie. In this video I will cover the sound design of Jack himself, the Foley and the ambiences of the scene, and overall what it is like to work on a feature film like this from a small home studio in the middle of nowhere. Let's start by looking through the scene that I will break down the sound design of. The video footage and the audio in this version is not the final version of the movie, but this is the last version I did before I sent it off for mixing, mastering, color grading and the quality control. The scene that I will cover in this video is from the middle of the movie, where one of the girls that are trapped in the school meets Jack on her own. A little warning before I hit play: this is a horror movie and this scene has 1 or 2 jump scares, just so you know. Alright, let's dive in. Designing the sound of a film like this is all about using sound to tell the story of the film. An example of this is when Jack pulls his claws over the metal bars. This is the first time the audience really sees his hands, and when I choose a really heavy metallic sound for that, it tells the story that this is not ordinary animal claws. These are giant metal claws, so the sounds tell so much more of the story than the visuals alone can. The sound design adds tons of depth and interest to the story of the film, and if you want to become an even better storyteller than you already are, I have prepared a short free guide to become a better storyteller with sound. So if you want some tips on how to make sound design work for visuals, I recommend you download it and have a look. It's totally free of charge and linked in the description below. And now it's time to take a look at the sound design of this scene. Alright, first thing first, big shout out to Lawrence Media for letting us take a look at behind the scenes like this of the visuals. Really fun to be able to show you the process and yeah, what's going on in a project like this. So yeah, this is the session. So the full movie had around 250 tracks or something like that. Here is 38. So I have removed everything that not playing in this scene, but otherwise this is the exact same session that I used when I designed the full movie. So I had to remove it because I have promised to not spoil anything, and I don't want to ruin the movie for you either. So yeah, but this is the things that's left, and this is like the overall view of it. So the video is up here, then we have the dialogue, the music by the really great composer Christoph Allersdorfer. totally amazing composer. It was a blast working with him on this one. And then underneath here we have the different stems or groups that I then delivered to Joel, who then mixed and mastered the full movie. And the reason that we set it up like this is just that we had a discussion before we started, basically, and I just asked Joel, how would you like to have it delivered to you? Do you want like, what do you want to have collapsed, and what do you want to have like separated? Because what he then does is that he takes all those stems and he's do the mixing with those stems, because he doesn't want 250 tracks to mix. He wants them collapsed in one way or another, but he also wants a little bit of flexibility to level them independently from each other. So say here, for example, we have the Foley and the footsteps. In a scene where we have both footsteps and the Foley, he wants to be able to level them independently from each other. And if I were to collapse all of these into one group, it wouldn't be possible to individually level them, basically. So this was like the middle ground of like collapsing and like make it as tidy as possible, but also keep as much of flexibility for him as possible. So we decided on ambiences. This is like the background beds of sounds, like room tones and stuff. So I have subcategories in here just for myself. So this is room tones and exteriors outside, and then we have more designed drones. And then we have some spot background sounds, and these are independent from the ambiences then, of course. And these are like specific background sounds in different parts, like we can hear a clock in a scene or something like that, and you just want to be able to level them independently from the bed itself if they collide with some dialogue or something like that. Foley is then divided into the different characters and stuff like that. I have removed most of that, of course, for this scene. Footsteps are also divided into the different characters. We have the Jack's footsteps here, and then I have some on wood and carpet and stuff like that. So nothing super crazy. It just, I mean, this will depend on the product and the mixing and master engineer that you work with. But I think, at least for me, it's really just important to have that conversation, and just what works for you, well, then we just make it as good as possible for the guys that we're serving, and we as sound designers are serving the movie, and we have to make that as good as possible. And I mean, the guys that takes it from this version that we have here is the mixing and mastering guys, so we have to make it as easy for them as possible to do as good work as they can to make the movie as good as it can be. So this is not the sexiest part, but it's really important in my opinion. Then we have the environment sounds. These are more like designed background sounds and sounds that are part of their environment, but it's not like a background sound. It can have a little bit of overlap, but in a horror movie like this, we have kind of much going on around in the environment, the different sounds and different like things that make sound that you might want to know about, or you've been tricked about, or something like that. So the environment sounds are more designed background sounds, basically. And then we have sound effects. These are very designed sounds, and I don't want to spoil anything, as I said, but there are some very, very designed moments in this movie. So that's for that. I have kept the sound effects map here, and also the background spot sounds, even though we don't have any background spot sounds in this scene or the sound effects. I just kept them in here, so you just get an overview of the full session, basically. And then lastly, we have Jack vocalizations, and he has his own folder here because he's such an important part of the movie, and he doesn't have any dialogue. So I basically had to bring him to life with his voice and the vocalizations of him and everything. So that's an important part of the full movie, and we also want to level him individually from everything else. So yeah, he got his own folder, basically. So my role in this project was that I got in quite late into the project. The music was written, everything was recorded. I got the raw recording on sets, raw recording sounds. But the tricky part with a movie like this is that it will be dubbed into different languages later. So in order to make that process work, we need to deliver something called an M&E track, a music and effects track, because the actors in the different languages will use the M&E track, and then they will do their vocalizations and the dialogue and everything to that M&E track, and that will create the sound bed for that language, basically. What that means for us is that I can't use any sound from the on-set recordings if it has some kind of vocalization or dialogue in it, because that's connected to the original actors, and that will collide with the other actors. So as soon as there's any kind of vocalization in the onset recordings, I had to just remove that and try to replace that in with some designed or sound effects libraries in a way, or record by myself. So that's a huge part of creating this movie, was to build all the different landscapes for different scenes with the ambiences, with the Foley, with the footsteps, because we can't use the onset recordings. And that's also true, I mean, if there's a camera beep and if there's some kind of noise on the onset recordings, we can't use that either, because it just doesn't work. And I mean, the onset recording, it's a bit of chaotic. It's a lot of things going on there, and it's not always that the recording comes out so clean that you can use them. And they also focus very much on the dialogue, and that's the main thing that they need to get out of those recordings, because the other things we as sound designers can build up, but the dialogue is very hard to build up afterwards, and you don't want to do new recordings of the dialogue if you don't have to. It's a really pain. So yeah, that's it. So you can see here the onset Foley here and set recordings is just these tiny small pieces down here. We can have a listen to this. This is from the recording on set. So you see it's small bits and pieces, but it's also really good to have it, because you can lean on it as a sound designer a little bit, and you just can get inspired by it, and you can derive ideas from it. But you need to do so much more than just put in the on-set recordings. So yeah, that's basically my role. Build up the ambiences, add the Foley that's needed, add the footsteps that needed, design all the sound design elements, design all the environment elements, add in the different background sounds and everything like that. And for this movie, Jack was a big part of creating and designing. So I think we start with him and dive into the process of how I made the voice for him. All right, so my idea when I watch the movie and watch Jack is that I want him to be like even larger than he looks, even heavier than he looks. I mean, he's a really tall actor, but I want him to feel even like more otherworldly and alien-like. So I want to make his footsteps super huge and his like roar super large, everything like over the top to like give him that alien-like, over-the-top, demon-like vibe for him, basically. And since this Jack in the Box Rises is the third movie in this series, Jack has a voice of his own from the earlier movies, and I got those sounds, so I can play with those and use those as a foundation. And also give a homage to those, because it's his voice, we can't just change that. So I used those as the foundation, and then I built upon those and designed even more different elements. And in this scene I leaned very heavily on his original sounds. So we have those here. Just some snarls when she hears him walking around in the corridor, and they just get louder and louder, basically, as closer he gets. And now we hear he's opening up his mouth. What I didn't get from the earlier movies was any kind of breaths, and this is something that the great Randy Tom talks about this all the time, for example, like how important the breath is for creating vocalizations for animals or creatures. So I wanted to create a set of breaths for him to use throughout the scene, because I think of him, I mean, he's basically the predator. He's basically using his nose to smell the prey. We can see that he is like sniffing in the air, looking around. So to me, it was important to create some kind of breath set of sounds for him. So what I used here was brown bears from Boom 1. So if we listen to the original here, let's set this to rate 1 and just bypass it. The original sound was this. Just a little bear breathing. And then I stretched that down 4 octaves down. And then I started to process that. So I started to add some bass with R bass. Then I pitched it down even further with elastic pitch. Then I gave it some details and energy with OTT. Then I used Morph EQ with this low talker preset to just give it a little bit more of clarity and focus as a vocalization more than an animal breathing. So with that it sounds like this. Without it. With it. Just a little bit more focused. And then I just used Decapitator to just saturate it a tiny bit. Nothing crazy. But all of that takes a sound like this to a sound like this. So just this like really like deep breaths, and then I used those and stretched them in different ways. Once again, just to create these different emotions depending on what he's doing. So we have the longer ones and the shorter ones. If you just take a listen to the full sequence of his breath and vocalizations here. And then we have that snarling in the between, like here also. So you get that natural sequence of breathing in and breathing out. He breathes in and then make the vocalization, breathes out again. And then we have the footsteps for him also. Here is basically the same kind of idea, just make it as big as and heavy as possible. So if we listen to this original, this is just some leather boots without any processing. It sounds like this. But I mean, he's like huge. We need to make it really big. So I pitch it down 1 octave first. And then I start to process that. So I used multipass here and I pitched it in different regions in different amounts, and then I filtered out the high end of it, and then it sounds like this. Then I added R bass to that, and that creates that tonal low end of it, and then a little bit of OTT. So we went from this to this. And when we pitch it down 1 octave without any algorithm or anything, we just stretch it out one to play it half speed. It also gets stretched out, as I said, which means that he gets these longer footsteps that's really appropriate for this scene. And then the third part to Jack in this scene is his claws. When he walks through the metal bars there, he like just nonchalantly, I don't know, nonchalant, is that the word? Just drags his claws over the metal bars, and it to me it's very much tells the story that he knows that he's in so much control here. She doesn't have any chance against him, so he can sound as much as he wants and he can just play around, but it also tells a little bit of information about his character to the audience, because this is the first time that we actually see his claws and we realize that these are not like ordinary claws. It's like this metal claws that I talked about earlier, and these are created out of there's metal bowl ring, but then it's layered with some barbell from a gym. And together they sound like this. Just a little bit of EQ, nothing else. So we have those big sound design moments with Jack vocalizations and stuff like that. But we also have these sound design moments where we mainly like enhance a little bit and add a little bit more emotion to a scene, a little more detail to a scene. So one situation like that is when she reaches for this lever here in the beginning, in this bar handle. So what I got from the onset recordings were these. So there are some details there, of course, but I feel like it's such a big struggle for her, and it's such an important part of the story that to tell the audience that nothing has happened, this is kind of broken or something, it will not move, but there's like a struggle in between her and the handle, and then I think the handle should have its own like voice basically and its own struggle. So I just enhanced it with a bunch of small tiny bits of pieces, from mechanical sounds, from tonal resonances, door handles, door knocks, mechanics gears, yeah, whatever I could find that I felt was appropriate, and I just created this palette of different sound that sounded like this. And in the ground scheme of everything, then we have the big environment bang comes in there. And what we do with a moment like that is totally up to us. So here I added like a metal bang, because when he searches for people, he is kind of rough. He just tosses things around him. So this is like, since I know how he like moves and behaves in different situations, I can use that knowledge to add the sound for a situation where like this, where we can't see him, but we will still recognize that it's his movement that creates the sound. And then to enhance and clarify that even further, I start to add some low gnarls there just after. So together. And then we have one more situation exactly the same, just building out some more details, building on when she is hearing him again here, the same kind of idea, but with a louder snarl and a different environment hit here. Just tells the audience that he is closer now. The bang is louder, we can hear more of his vocalization and the movement in his mouth now. So the final piece of this puzzle is to take a look at the ambiences, and I thought that we just listen to just the ambiences like 40 seconds or so, and then I pause, and then I just discuss a little bit about the thought process of it and what I did there. So just ambiences from the beginning. Something like that. So the idea here is to both make it feel natural that we're moving from different environments. When we're moving from the corridor right here in the beginning, that like a smaller room tone, and we're moving into this bigger room over here when we get out in the barn, and we have those over here. We hear a little bit more wind over here, a little bit, just a different kind of ambience. Just to start, so that is very much what kind of room are we in. But then I start to think of what kind of environment is it more, what's outside of this barn, what happens around us. And since we're in a barn, there might be other animals there, so why not have some bird calls and stuff? So I added those in. And that is just to paint a little bit more of the picture of the environment that we're in, add a little bit more life to it. But it also brings that contrast, because we have her struggling a lot from the upcoming threat from Jack, but we also have these like really playful birds, and it creates that contrast. But then when she sees that he's coming and he gets closer and closer, I just fade out the birds and add in this very ominous designed drone instead. So you can have a listen to those. And my idea here is that Jack basically like drains the life out of the space that he's in. When he like is there, the birds don't call anymore. He's just pure evil. So he drains the place out of all life, and just remove that and add in this very designed drone instead. But we still have the room tone. And then we also get help from the music here when he arrives. Christoph builds up the tension with that. But it's a really interesting and fun way to work with ambience, to think of it in these layers. So you have the layer of what kind of room are we in, what does that sound like, and then where is that room placed, what happens around that. Are we in a city, so we have like police sirens, or do we have church bells, or do we have like restaurant calls, or what do we have outside of that room? And then we have like all the background sounds in that room. That could be ticking clocks, that could be other stuff that sounds there, air conditioning and stuff like that. And on top of that, we can play around with the emotion of the scene and just add in these small like tension drones and just change the quality of the emotion that we feel when we look at it. And as an audience, it's really hard to pinpoint what happened there, because it still feels natural. We just change the way they perceive the place and the emotional feeling of the place, basically. Another thing that's really hard to pinpoint is magic sound effects, so watch this next.